The wind carried dust across the plains like a ghost that would not rest, a bitter breath from the desert reminding all who lived here that life was not given lightly in the West. A single wagon creaked along the hard-packed trail, drawn by a pair of war mules with ribs showing, their flanks streaked with sweat. Seated at the reins was a woman in faded calico, her bonnet drooping low to shield her eyes from the blistering sun. She held herself upright, though her bones felt like tinder from too many nights without sleep. Her hands were calloused, scarred from work, but steady. Her lips were dry, cracked, and she tasted the grit of the land with every breath. Behind her, in the back of the wagon, lay all she owned, a patched quilt, an iron skillet, a Bible with loose pages, and a small bundle of clothes. The rest had been lost long ago. She was a widow, and the word clung to her like dust that no rain would wash off. Her husband had been buried on the edge of Kansas soil, taken by fever before the winter broke. She had no children of her own to keep her tethered to that place, no kin who would take her in. So she left, chasing whispers of work in the high country, rumors that a rancher far out on the open range needed a cook, maybe a pair of hands to help with children who had no mother left to guide them. It was not much, but it was something, and something was better than nothing. The trail turned between cottonwoods clinging to a stream bed, their leaves rattling like tin. In the distance she saw it, the ranch, a house, weather-beaten but standing, its porch sagging slightly at the corners. A barn sat beyond it, its roof patched with mismatched boards. 2 corrals lay half empty, a few thin cattle chewing dust. The fences leaned as though weary of holding. But what struck her most was the loneliness that hovered over the place, as if grief itself had taken residence. Smoke rose from the chimney, but not much. The land carried silence heavy as stone. She pulled the mules to a halt. For a moment, she considered turning back. She was not beautiful. Her mirror had told her that long before sorrow hollowed her cheeks. Men wanted wives with soft hands and bright eyes, not a woman hardened by loss. Yet hunger and emptiness leave no room for vanity. She took a breath, climbed down from the wagon, and walked toward the porch, her boots crunching gravel. The door opened before she could knock. A tall man stepped out, shoulders broad beneath a worn shirt, his hair dark and long, pulled back loosely, his jaw rough with stubble. His eyes were sharp but tired, carrying the weight of too many nights with little rest. A scar ran across his left temple into his hairline, pale against sun-browned skin. He looked at her not with curiosity but with guarded wariness, as if every stranger might be another threat. Behind him, 2 children peeked out, a boy of maybe 10, standing stiff with fists clenched, protective though his frame was slight. Beside him, a girl no older than 6 clutched the doorway, eyes wide as stormlit skies. Both were barefoot, clothes patched and worn, but their faces told more than their rags. They were wary, hungry for something they couldn't name, shadows of loss etched in their gazes. The widow lowered her eyes briefly, then lifted them again, steady though her chest tightened. "I heard tell," she said, voice dry as the wind, "that you might be needing help." The rancher studied her in silence, his jaw working as though testing whether to speak at all. Finally, he said, "And what kind of help do you figure you could give?" She set her bundle down gently at her feet. "I can cook. I can mend. I can keep house. I can help raise children." She paused, swallowing against a lump in her throat. "I ain't pretty, sir, but I can work." His gaze flicked to his children, then back to her. Something unreadable crossed his face, a mixture of pride and pain. He stepped aside at last. "Come in, then." Inside, the house smelled of smoke and stale bread. The hearth burned low, ashes more than flame. A pot of beans sat cold on the stove, untouched. A few chairs, a rough-hewn table, and little else filled the room. The boy stood tall, watching her every move as if daring her to touch what wasn't hers. The girl slid closer to her father's leg, half hiding behind it. The widow removed her bonnet, revealing hair pulled back in a simple knot streaked with gray, though she was not yet old. She set her hands on the table, steady, sure. "First thing," she said softly, "these children need a meal that fills more than their bellies. They need comfort." The rancher's brow furrowed. He did not argue. He only nodded once, as though admitting truth he had been too weary to voice. He motioned toward the pantry. There ain't much. She looked. A sack of flour, a bit of lard, some beans, coffee, and a strip of salt pork. Her heart tightened, but she had stretched less to make more before. Soon the skillet hissed with pork grease, and the smell of bread rising filled the air. The children edged closer, drawn by the scent. The widow stirred beans with a wooden spoon, humming a tune under her breath, low and steady, a song her mother once sang when storms rattled the roof. The rancher leaned against the wall, arms crossed, eyes fixed not on the food but on the woman herself. He saw how her hands moved, efficient, unshaken, and how the children crept near her, without realizing it. When she set the bread on the table and ladled beans into bowls, the boy hesitated. The widow looked at him, eyes firm but kind. "Eat," she said simply. He obeyed, hunger stronger than suspicion. After supper, silence settled heavy. The fire crackled. The girl drifted asleep against her father's arm. The boy lingered by the hearth, eyelids heavy though he fought it. The widow cleared dishes without waiting to be asked. The rancher finally spoke. "What's your name?" She gave it softly, almost reluctantly, as though it was a fragile thing that might break if spoken too loud. He nodded, repeating it under his breath, testing how it sounded in his mouth. Then he said nothing more. That night she lay on the narrow cot they gave her in the corner of the main room. Sleep was restless. She dreamed of thunder and fire, of the husband she'd buried, of empty nights where the wind howled through broken shutters. She woke to a sound. At first she thought it was coyotes, but then she heard it clearer, boots in the dirt outside. She sat up, heart pounding. The rancher was already at the window, rifle in hand, eyes narrowed at the darkness. He did not fire. Whoever was out there left only a sign, a mark carved into the fence post by the corral, rough and deliberate. At dawn, she saw it, a crude circle with a slash across it. Her breath caught. She had seen marks like that before, gang signs, warnings, promises of return. The rancher touched it with his fingers, jaw tight. The boy stared at it in silence, then looked at his father with something like fear. "They've been out there?" the widow asked. The rancher's voice was low, steady but carried weight. "They've been watching." The day passed with a heaviness that could not be shaken. The widow scrubbed floors, patched shirts, kept the children busy with small chores, but her ears strained for any sound beyond the wind. The rancher rode the fence line, returning with dust on his boots and no peace in his eyes. By evening, tension knotted in every corner of the house. When night fell, the widow built the fire high, though warmth was not what they needed. It was light, something to push back the shadows. The children sat near her, clinging close as she mended a torn shirt. The rancher cleaned his rifle with slow, deliberate care. The girl asked, voice barely above a whisper, "Will they come back?" The rancher froze for a heartbeat. The widow answered before he could. Her voice calm though her pulse raced. "If they do, they'll find this house isn't empty." The rancher looked at her then, a long, steady look, as if measuring the weight of her words. For the first time, something softened in his eyes, though it was fleeting. Later, when the children slept, the widow draped a quilt over them and lingered by the fire. The rancher sat opposite, the glow etching hard lines across his face. "You didn't have to come here," he said finally. She met his gaze. "And you didn't have to let me in, but here we are." Silence stretched between them, thick but not empty. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters, and far off, a coyote cried. The widow thought of the mark carved in the fence post, of shadows moving in the dark, of the hunger in the children's eyes when she first arrived. She thought of the way the rancher had stood ready with rifle in hand, scars on his skin, telling stories he did not yet speak. Her voice was quiet, almost swallowed by the crackle of the fire. "I ain't pretty, sir, but I can cook and I can raise your children. If trouble comes, I'll stand with you." The rancher said nothing, but his eyes did not turn away, and in the silence she felt something shift, something fragile, something dangerous, something that might grow if the land itself allowed it. Outside, unseen in the moonlight, another symbol was carved into a tree near the barn, deep and cruel. The night held its breath. And the story was only beginning. The days that followed stretched taut like a rope ready to snap. The widow felt it in every breath of wind that carried dust against the windows, in every flicker of shadow along the ridge. The children sensed it too, their laughter coming in short bursts before fading into watchful silence. The rancher moved through his land with vigilance that never rested, rifle slung across his back, eyes narrowing at every fresh track in the dirt. The mark on the fence post had not been the last. More symbols appeared carved into trees, into the barn door, even burned into a board near the corral. Each one a warning, each one a promise. The widow busied herself in the house, but her hands trembled when she held a needle, when she stirred the pot. She had come here seeking a place to belong, work to fill her days, children to soothe her loneliness. Instead, she found herself once more staring down the specter of men who lived by cruelty. Yet each time her fear swelled, she remembered the children's faces as they ate her bread, the way the girl leaned against her side, the boy's shoulders easing when she praised his work. They needed her, and perhaps the man did too, though he would not say it. One evening, the boy followed her to the well with the bucket. He glanced over his shoulder more than once, as if expecting eyes upon them. When he finally spoke, his voice carried more burden than a child should. "Pa says not be scared," he murmured, "but I hear him at night. He don't sleep." The widow lowered the bucket, the creak of rope filling the silence. "Your father carries weight on him. Doesn't mean he won't protect you." The boy's gaze lifted to her, uncertain, searching. "Will you stay?" Her throat tightened. She did not answer at once, watching the bucket sink into darkness until it splashed. When she drew it back up, she met his eyes. "So long as there's breath in me, I'll stand here." The boy nodded slowly, and for the first time since she'd come, he let the shadow of a smile touch his face. That night, as the fire dimmed low, the rancher sat opposite her, cleaning the rifle with the same patience as always. Yet his movements were tighter, his jaw harder. He finally spoke. "They'll come soon." The widow folded the quilt in her lap, pressing the fabric tight between her fingers. "And when they do?" His eyes lifted to hers. In them, she saw the same storm she glimpsed before. Pain, pride, determination. "We fight, or we fall." The words clung to her long after the fire burned to ash. The attack came before dawn. The first sound was the bark of dogs, frantic and sharp. Then the thunder of hooves, voices cutting the cold air with jeers. The widow sprang from her cot, heart hammering. The rancher was already at the door, rifle raised. The boy and girl clung to her skirts, eyes wide with terror. The riders circled the house, torches flaring in the dim light. Shadows leapt across the walls. One voice rang out, cruel and taunting. "We told you this land was ours to take. You should have left it, rancher. Now we'll burn it with you in it." The widow's blood turned to ice. She had heard that voice before in Kansas, on the night her own world had been torn apart. Her breath caught as memory struck like a knife. The raid, the fire, her husband's cries silenced forever. The outlaw who had carved his mark on her life now stood outside this house. The rancher fired a warning shot through the window, shattering glass, sending the riders scattering. Shouts rose, curses filled the air. The widow pulled the children toward the hearth, pressing them low, shielding them with her body. Her heart thundered so loud she thought it would shake the walls apart. The riders returned fire. Bullets splintered wood, tore holes through shutters. The rancher stood firm, returning shot for shot, each one deliberate. But they were many, and he was one. The widow felt fear claw at her throat, but something else surged stronger. Fury, raw and unyielding. She rose, crossing the room, and seized her late husband's rifle from where it leaned forgotten. Her hands shook, but she forced them still. She looked at the rancher. His eyes widened, not in surprise, but in something like recognition, as though he'd always known she had fire in her bones. Together they fought. The rancher took down one rider from the porch. The widow fired from the window, her shot true enough to send another crashing into the dust. The boy, trembling but determined, fetched ammunition, while the girl clung to her, whispering prayers. The fight raged as the sky began to pale. Smoke thickened where torches lit the barn roof. The widow dashed outside with bucket, flames licking at her skirt. But the rancher was there, dousing the fire, driving back the riders with blasts that sent them scattering once more. Then the leader appeared, striding from the dust with cruel smile, his gun gleaming. He fired, and the rancher staggered, a red bloom spreading across his side. The widow cried out, rushing to him, but he lifted a hand. "Don't stop," he rasped. "Finish it." Her heart tore, but she turned to face the outlaw. The man laughed, raising his pistol toward her. His eyes burned with the same malice she remembered, the same darkness that had stolen her husband. Rage steadied her hand where grief once shook it. She raised her rifle, breath steady, finger firm. "You took one life from me," she said, voice clear as steel. "You won't take another." She fired. The outlaw fell, the echo rolling across the land like thunder. The remaining riders broke, fleeing into the hills, leaving dust and silence behind. The widow dropped the rifle, rushing to the rancher's side. His face was pale, lips tight with pain, but his eyes met hers. He was still alive. She pressed her hands to his wound, whispering words she barely knew she had. The children knelt close, the boy clutching his father's hand, the girl weeping into his chest. Time blurred, marked only by the sound of ragged breathing, by the widow's steady hands binding cloth against blood. At last, the bleeding slowed, the rancher's breath evened, though weak. His eyes closed, but his chest still rose and fell. Relief washed through her like rain over parched land. The sun rose, casting light across the battered ranch. The barn smoldered. The fence stood scarred. The land bore the marks of struggle, but it was theirs. The widow sat on the porch, the children leaning against her, their small bodies warm against her sides. The rancher lay resting inside, alive though worn. The boy spoke softly, almost a whisper. "You didn't run." She looked down at him, brushing hair from his brow. "I told you I'd stand." He nodded, eyes shining with something new, trust, belief. Later, when the rancher woke, he found her there, weary but unbroken, watching over his children as if they were her own. He tried to speak, but she hushed him gently. She placed bread in his hand, as she had that first night, her touch steady, her eyes unflinching. No more words were needed. The days that followed were hard. The ranch bore scars, the children bore memories, and the widow bore her own share bruises. Yet there was strength in their union, a quiet resilience that the land itself seemed to honor. She cooked, she mended, she taught. The rancher, though scarred and slow to heal, began to smile again, small at first, then stronger, especially when he saw the children laugh, when he saw her move through the house as though she had always belonged. One evening, the girl climbed into her lap, resting her head against her shoulder. "Mama," she murmured without thought, the words slipping free. The widow froze, her breath catching, tears stinging her eyes. She held the child close, unable to speak. When she looked up, she saw the rancher standing in the doorway, watching. He did not correct the child. He only met the widow's gaze, and in that look lay everything unspoken, gratitude, tenderness, the beginning of love. The land healed slowly, as all wounds do, but each day they rose together, faced chores together, laughed in rare moments, fought back shadows that lingered. The widow had come to the ranch with nothing but weary hands and a humble plea. Now she had something more, a place, a family, a man who, though scarred by the past, stood beside her with quiet strength. And in the evening, when the fire burned low and the wind rattled through the grass, the widow would whisper, half to herself, half to the man who listened in silence, "I ain't pretty, sir, but I can cook, and I can raise your children." And he would nod, reaching to cover her hand with his, the roughness of his palm against hers, speaking more than words could. The prairie stretched endless beyond their door, cruel and unforgiving. Yet for them it held a future, one carved not by beauty or ease, but by resilience, sacrifice, and a fragile, fierce bond they had forged in the fire of survival. And somewhere beyond the hills, the dust of fleeing riders faded, their threat broken. The West would always test those who dared to live upon it, but this family would stand, scarred, yet unyielding. The storyteller's voice would soften here, like embers glowing low. So you see, friends, not every tale of the West is written in gold or glory. Sometimes it's written in bread baked warm, in children's laughter, in the courage of a woman who thought she had nothing left to give. She wasn't pretty, no, but she was strong, and that was enough. And as the fire cracked, the voice would add with warmth. If such stories stir your heart, pull up closer next time. The trail holds many more, and this campfire will be waiting